What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Talking Thrones. Today I want to discuss a topic that I once talked about on my channel before. Maybe around 10 months ago I made a video about the original outline George R.R. Martin had in mind for his epic fantasy series A Song of Ice and Fire. Some of you may be familiar with this and some of you may not be. Over 20 years ago, back in 1993 actually, George had wrote a 3-page letter that contained the basic outline for the novels he intended on writing for his story. And in this original draft, there was some major spoilers considering none of the books had been published yet. He went over some of the major plot points he would have, and he also listed the 5 characters that he intended on surviving the entire series actually written down. This letter he wrote stayed private for over 20 years until someone from Waterstones thought it would be a good idea to post the pictures of this outline on Twitter. They eventually deleted the tweet, but not before someone screenshot the images and spread it across the internet like wildfire. The reason why I want to talk about this again today is because this seems to be more relevant now than it has ever been, considering there is only one season left of Game of Thrones. And since the television show is based off of the books, there is a good chance that these 5 characters may survive the entire television series also. The showrunners David and Dan have said on multiple occasions that they basically know how George intends on finishing his story, and for years they have also said they know how they are going to end the show. So I can only assume they will both end in a very similar fashion, but it won't be exactly the same. Even though they are both taking their separate ways to get to the ending, there is a chance the main characters will stay alive in both the show and the books. But there is one major thing here you have to keep in mind. A lot of the stuff from this original outline has changed. It has kept the same general theme, but the majority of the plot points he made never actually happened. George ended up changing his mind and going in different directions with some things, but either way I still find this outline to be extremely fascinating. I have read this at least 5 different times now and I still find it just as interesting as I did the first time when I read it. In my opinion, I believe the 5 characters that he listed may no longer be as safe as they once were, but I have been in a few debates about this in the last couple days. So what I want to do is read to you this original draft, then we can talk about it some more afterwards because there are a few more things I want to say about it. Before I read this, I have to point out that whoever took the photos of George's outline left the blinds open behind them so you can see the sun shining through the windows, and there are several glares across these laminated sheets, which makes it hard to read some of this, but with today's basic technology, there are ways to alter the images to be able to read it all anyway. So I will do my best to translate to you as much as possible. So let's begin. Dear Ralph, here are my first 13 chapters, 170 pages of the high fantasy novel I promised you, which I'm calling A Game of Thrones. When completed, this will be the first volume in what I see as an epic trilogy with the overall title A Song of Ice and Fire. As you know, I don't outline my novels. I find that if I know exactly where a book is going, I lose all interest in writing it. I do, however, have some strong notions as to the overall structure of the story that I'm telling, and the eventual fate of many of the principal characters in the drama. Roughly speaking, there are 3 major conflicts set in motion in the chapters enclosed. These will form the major plot threads of the trilogy, intertwining with each other in what should be a complex but exciting narrative tapestry. Each of the components presents a major threat to the peace of my imaginary realm, the Seven Kingdoms, and to the lives of my principal characters. The first threat grows from enmity between the great house of Lannister and Stark as it plays out in a cycle of plot, counterplot, ambition, murder, and revenge, with the Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms the ultimate prize. This will form the backbone of the first volume of the trilogy A Game of Thrones. While the Lion of Lannister and the Direwolf of Stark snarl and scrap, however, a second and greater threat takes shape across the Narrow Sea, where the Dothraki horse lords mass their barbarian hordes for a great invasion of the Seven Kingdoms, led by the fierce and beautiful Daenerys Stormborn, the last of the Targaryen dragon lords. The Dothraki invasion will be the central story of my second volume, A Dance with Dragons. The greatest danger of all, however, comes from the north, from the icy wastes beyond the wall, where half-forgotten demons out of legend, the inhuman others, raise the cold dead legions of the undead and the never-born, and prepare to ride down on the winds of winter to extinguish everything that we would call life. The only thing that stands between the Seven Kingdoms and an endless night is the Wall, and a handful of men in black called the Night's Watch. Their story will be the heart of my third volume, The Winds of Winter. The final battle will also draw together characters and plot threads left from the first 2 books and resolve all in one huge climax. The 13 chapters on hand should give you a notion as to my narrative strategy. All 3 books will feature a complex mosaic of intercutting points of view among various of my large and diverse cast of players. The cast will not always remain the same. Old characters will die and new ones will be introduced. Some of the fatalities will include sympathetic viewpoint characters. I want the reader to feel that no one is ever completely safe, not even the characters who seem to be the heroes. The suspense always ratchets up a notch when you know that any character can die at any time. 5 central characters will make it through all 3 volumes, however, growing from children to adults and changing the world and themselves in the process. In a sense, my trilogy is almost a generational saga, telling the life stories of these 5 characters, 3 men and 2 women. The 5 key players are Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys Targaryen, and the 3 children of Winterfell, Arya, Bran, and the bastard Jon Snow. All of them are introduced at some length in the chapters you have to hand. This is going to be, I hope, quite an epic. Epic in its scale, epic in its action, and epic in its length. I see all 3 volumes as big books, running about 700 to 800 manuscript pages, so things are just barely getting underway in the 13 chapters that I've sent you. I have quite a clear notion of how the story is going to unfold in the first volume of Game of Thrones. Things will get a lot worse for the poor Starks before they get better, I'm afraid. Lord Eddard Stark and his wife Catelyn Tully are both doomed, and they will perish at the hands of their enemies. Ned will discover what happened to his friend Jon Arryn, but before he can act on his knowledge, King Robert will have an unfortunate accident and the throne will pass to his sullen and brutal son Joffrey, still a minor. Joffrey will not be sympathetic, and Ned will be accused of treason, but before he is taken, he will help his wife and his daughter Arya escape back to Winterfell. Each of the contending families will learn it has a member of dubious loyalty in its midst. Sansa Stark, wed to Joffrey Baratheon, will bear him a son, the heir to the throne, and when the crunch comes, she will choose her husband and child over her parents and siblings, a choice she will later bitterly rue. Tyrion Lannister, meanwhile, will befriend both Sansa and her sister Arya, while growing more and more disenchanted with his own family. Young Bran will come out of his coma after a strange prophetic dream, only to discover that he will never walk again. He will turn to magic at first in hopes of restoring his legs, but later for its own sake. When his father, Eddard Stark, is executed, Bran will see the shape of doom descending on all of them, but nothing he can say will stop his brother Robb from calling the banners in rebellion. All the North will be inflamed by war, and Robb will win several splendid victories and maim Joffrey Baratheon on the battlefield, but in the end he will not be able to stand against Jaime and Tyrion Lannister and their allies. Robb Stark will die in battle, and Tyrion Lannister will besiege and burn Winterfell. Jon Snow the bastard will remain in the far north. He will mature into a ranger of great daring, and ultimately will succeed his uncle as the commander of the Night's Watch. When Winterfell burns, Catelyn Stark will be forced to flee the north with her son Bran and her daughter Arya, and hounded by Lannister riders, they will seek refuge at the Wall, but the men of the Night's Watch give up their families when they take the Black. And Jon and Benjen will not be able to help, to Jon's anguish. It will lead to a bitter estrangement between Jon and Bran. Arya will be more forgiving until she realizes, with terror, that she has fallen in love with Jon, who is not only her half-brother, but a man of the Night's Watch, sworn to celibacy. Their passion will continue to torment Jon and Arya throughout the trilogy, until the secret of Jon's true parentage is finally revealed in the last book. Abandoned by the Night's Watch, Catelyn and her children will find their only hope of safety lies even further north beyond the Wall, where they fall into the hands of Mance Rayder, the king beyond the Wall, and get a dreadful glimpse of the inhuman others as they attack the wildling encampment. Bran's magic, Arya's sword and needle, and the savagery of their direwolves will help them survive, but their mother Catelyn will die at the hands of the others. Over across the Narrow Sea, Daenerys Targaryen will discover that her new husband, the Dothraki Khal Drogo, has little interest in invading the Seven Kingdoms, much to her brother's frustration. When Viserys presses his claims past the point of tact or wisdom, Khal Drogo will finally grow annoyed and kill him out of hand, eliminating the Targaryen pretender and leaving Daenerys as the last of her line. Daenerys will bide her time, but she will not forget. When the moment is right, she will kill her husband to avenge her brother, and flee with a trusted friend into the wilderness beyond Vaes Dothrak. Daenerys will be hunted by Dothraki blood riders, but she will stumble on a cache of dragon's eggs. The birth of the young dragon will give Daenerys the power to bend the Dothraki to her will. Then she begins to plan for her invasion of the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion Lannister will continue to travel, to plot, and to play the Game of Thrones, finally removing his nephew Joffrey in disgust at the boy king's brutality. Jaime Lannister will follow Joffrey on the throne of the Seven Kingdoms by the simple expedient of killing everyone ahead of him in the line of succession and blaming his brother Tyrion for the murders. Exiled, Tyrion will change sides, making common cause with the surviving Starks to bring his brother down, and falling helplessly in love with Arya Stark while he's at it. His passion is, alas, unreciprocated, but no less intense for that, and it will lead to a deadly rivalry between Tyrion and Jon Snow. But that's the second book. I hope you will find some editors who are as excited about all of this as I am. Feel free to share this letter with anyone who wants to know how the story will go. Now, if you look at the bottom of the last page George sent back in 1993, you can see that there is about one paragraph redacted. Something they didn't want anyone else to see, but once again, to some crafty people on the internet, they were able to decipher some of this somehow. Keep in mind, I don't know how accurate this is, but this is what they were able to decipher from the redacted section of this letter. If you look on the screen now, you can try to pause this video and read it for yourself, and I'm not sure how accurate that might be because that doesn't seem like anything too secretive at this point. Most of the things written there were already said earlier in this draft, so I don't know why someone would try to hide it now, but you be the judge of that. But there are a few interesting things I wanted to point out in this draft. George intended on having Jon and Arya fall in love with each other. And I know some of you hate the fact that Jon and Daenerys are falling in love because they are obviously related. But can you imagine if Jon and Arya actually fell in love? I think that would be even worse considering they grew up together in the same house as brother and sister, although we all know they actually aren't. But what I wanted to show you is how George actually said this would play out. He said Jon and Arya's passion for each other will continue to torment them until Jon's true parentage comes out. I think that is very interesting because it says Jon and Arya will never actually act on their emotions, but when his true parentage comes out, then something must happen. He said it will continue to torment them until his true parentage comes out. So does that mean when they find out they aren't brother and sister that they actually hook up? Or does that mean something else, like maybe it rips them apart because Jon is actually a Targaryen? I'm wondering if he still plans on doing some version of this in the books. I doubt it ever happens in this show because there isn't enough time and Jon has already fell in love with Dany, but I thought that was an interesting way to put it. But it also says there would be a love triangle between Jon, Tyrion, and Arya. It actually says this would turn into a deadly rivalry between Jon and Tyrion, and we never even got a hint of this in the television show or the books yet. But some people believe they may do a version of this in the show ever since Tyrion gave that look as Jon and Daenerys were having sex on the boat. I've even seen some people say they may do this deadly rivalry between Jon and Tyrion over the love of Daenerys. It did appear that Tyrion was upset, but I don't actually believe it was because he was jealous of Jon. I think Tyrion must know how this is going to complicate things in the future. Tyrion may also feel his influence slipping away even more now. He's already made enough bad decisions that has Daenerys no longer taking his advice, but with her in love with Jon, now she may never listen to Tyrion again, and instead follow everything that Jon wants to do. And Tyrion can sense this may be happening sooner than later, but that's just my opinion. As you can see, most of this draft has changed in many ways. George only planned on writing 3 books to complete his series, but as we all know, he wants to write 7 books now, and they are all over 700 pages long. Which is what he was originally thinking. Ned and Catelyn still died, but not exactly how he had planned. Ned was never able to save Catelyn and Arya by getting them back to Winterfell. Catelyn did not die beyond the walls. She died at the Red Wedding and was resurrected as Lady Stoneheart. And Robb Stark never died on the battlefield like he wanted either. He died at the Red Wedding too. And I'm actually glad the Red Wedding was done the way it was instead. It ended up being one of the greatest episodes in television history in my opinion. Joffrey was never maimed on the battlefield by Robb either, although that would have been fantastic. And Sansa never had Joffrey's baby either, thank the old gods and the new. And Tyrion never burned down Winterfell. Catelyn, Arya, and Bran never met Jon at the Wall. They never went beyond the Wall and met Mance Rayder either. And Daenerys never killed Khal Drogo to avenge her brother's death. She didn't stumble across the dragon eggs just lying somewhere either. And most of all, Jaime never murdered anyone to sit on the Iron Throne. Could you imagine Jaime killing everyone next in line to be on the throne and actually blaming Tyrion for the murders? That would have completely changed Tyrion and Jaime's relationship, and I'm glad it never went down like that. But I think that's enough examples. As you can see, so much has changed, and this leads me to the most important question of them all. Do you think the 5 central characters George planned on having survive the entire series still remains the same? Will Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, Bran, and Arya still make it through the end? And another question is, will these characters survive the entire Game of Thrones series too? George said he wanted to write a story that made the readers feel like no one is ever safe, even the heroes. The drama and suspense really ratchet up a notch when you know that any character can die at any time. But even with all that in mind, he still wanted to keep these 5 people alive no matter what. But in my opinion, I don't think they are all as safe as he once had planned. In the show, it might be different too, because they haven't been killing as many love characters as they used to ever since they went off the books. They did kill Stannis and Lady Olenna, but even those deaths were done off screen. The biggest character they killed was Jon Snow, but they brought him right back, and that's even in the books. The only character that feels 100% safe to me is Tyrion Lannister, and I really don't know why, but he just seems to feel like he will make it all the way through. I feel that way about Samwell Tarly too. I think they're going to be 2 of the characters left over that will help rebuild and restore Westeros and make it great again. But the other 4 characters, Jon, Daenerys, Bran, and Arya, I feel like they are in danger. I think any one of them can die in the last book or the last episode. And I don't know which ones will die or how, but I could easily see Jon sacrificing himself, or even Bran having to sacrifice himself and his powers to put an end to the Night King. These are just my opinions though, but tell me how you feel about all this. Do you believe they are still safe as George intended, or do you think any of them can die now that he has changed so many other things? Which ones do you think will die or survive at the end of the Game of Thrones television series? Let me know all your questions and thoughts down below, because I'm very curious to see what the majority of you have to say about this. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to watch the video. I really appreciate all of you for doing that. And I also want to thank my Patreon supporters too. I hope you all have a great day. Bye.